The night breathed guilt as Elias walked without direction, feeling his soul unravel from the inside. He had just left a service where others spoke of miracles, yet the only miracle he longed for was to pray 5 minutes without sensing that God had abandoned him. The words "pray without ceasing" burned in his mind like an impossible command, almost cruel, exposing his weakness. As he moved through the empty street, the silence mocked his failing devotion. Then the vision of his struggle reached me, and I recognized something that echoed from my own spiritual wanderings. It is I, John Bunyan, who watches this broken man, for I once walked valleys where even breathing felt like sin. And I see the same battle that once tore me open rise now against him. Elias stopped in the middle of the empty street when an unseen weight crashed onto his chest, as if the entire heaven had fallen silent against him. I felt the same tremor that once seized me right before a revelation that would change everything. The night carried the weight of an unspoken verdict, and as I watched Elias walk, I saw a man on the edge of spiritual collapse. His face revealed someone who believed not only that he had lost his way, but that he had lost God himself. The command "pray without ceasing" echoed like a taunt, a burden fit only for unreachable saints. Each step confessed silent defeat. Elias felt prayer had become a language he no longer understood, and his hardened heart resisted opening. I saw the unrest of a man who believed he must produce faith, as though God were waiting for flawless devotion. His chest tightened in despair, and the cold wind carried away the words he wished he could speak. His inability shamed him deeply. As he walked, Paul's words struck him like an old wound reopening. Pray without ceasing had followed him since youth, but now it sounded like an accusation. He imagined it demanded perfect, uninterrupted speech, as though heaven rejected anyone who faltered. This crushed him, and his trembling shoulders revealed the torment within. The city slept, but a war raged inside him. I watched his eyes search the darkness for something, a sign, a presence, anything to prove he was not abandoned. The fear of no longer being heard consumed him, and the sense of divine distance grew like a shadow without end. Elias tried to grip faith, but it slipped like sand through his fingers. I followed him with the eyes of an old pilgrim, for I recognized those wounds as ones I too carried. I remembered believing God expected a heart always burning, free of failure, distraction, or weakness. I too trembled before the command to pray without ceasing, as if called to scale a mountain no man could climb. Elias relived my anguish. When he turned into a narrow side street, his knees nearly buckled. He leaned against the damp wall, trying not to collapse. His breathing shook and tears gathered in his eyes. He wanted to pray but could not. His mouth opened but no words came. The silence struck him harder than any blow, and the weight of it crushed his spirit. In that moment I realized he thought heaven was disappointed in him. He imagined God required constant discipline, flawless devotion. He did not know prayer without ceasing grows from dependence, not performance. My heart ached for him, for I too once believed wrongly. He mistook the command for an impossible task instead of an invitation to breathe grace. A faint sound emerged from within him, not from his lips but from his wounded soul. A raw, childlike groan released when pain becomes greater than pride. I remembered the scripture that sustained me in prison. The Spirit himself intercedes with groanings too deep for words. Elias had reached the point where man ends and God begins. He wiped his face with trembling hands, feeling cold skin and a burning heart. His eyes lifted timidly toward the dark sky, searching for courage to believe again. No stars appeared, and the silence lingered, but something inside him softened. It was as if the inner resistance that bound him had begun to crumble. The ground of his soul was being prepared. He walked until he reached a lamppost with no light. The place felt lifeless, but his spirit was entering a field of revelation. I remembered how often despair became the threshold of awakening. Elias was about to learn that praying without ceasing is not a marathon of words, but the posture of a heart, turning again and again to God. A memory surfaced, something he once heard but never understood. A preacher had said, "Continuous prayer is not crafted speech but orientation." That whisper rose inside him like comfort. His chest still ached, but his breathing steadied slightly. His body seemed to surrender to grace, even if he didn't recognize it. He slid to the ground, resting his head on his knees. There he finally admitted what he had hidden even from himself. He wasn't fighting God, he was fighting himself. Heaven had not closed its doors, his fear had built the walls. That silent confession was the heart's first step toward true continual prayer. The sight moved me deeply, for the same truth once shattered my pride. Praying without ceasing is being turned toward God, even when the soul is in ruins. It is not performance, but surrender. Elias unknowingly was learning this. His shattered heart leaned heavenward like a trembling candle refusing to go out. The night witnessed a quiet miracle. He whispered a faint phrase, barely audible, not eloquence, but anguish. God, don't leave me alone. Those imperfect words rose to heaven like pure incense. Elias did not know that the weak cry of a broken heart is stronger than flawless prayers from a distant one. Divine presence began to draw near. The breeze shifted. Not the cutting cold from before, but a soft touch brushing his skin like a silent answer. Elias closed his eyes, sensing something he could not name. Heaven did not roar, open, or flash. It did something greater. It came near. I recognized that touch, for it had once revived me in my darkest valleys. Elias felt his heartbeat slow. The anguish did not vanish, but hope mingled with it like a fragile dawn. He realized that praying without ceasing might not mean never failing, but always returning to God, even when everything inside him fights against it. Truth began to rise like light on the horizon of his soul. The silence of night changed. No longer the abyss that devoured him, but a space where God could be heard. Elias felt small, but in a new way. Small before a God who did not demand perfection, but presence. His breath became his prayer. Each inhale whispered, I still need you. Thus began Elias's awakening. The command that once threatened him began to reveal its true face. To pray without ceasing was to live aware of God, not bound by performance. Elias was being led into that truth with trembling yet genuine steps. His soul began to breathe again. The faint light of dawn stretched across the sky. Elias, still on the ground, looked upward and sensed that something within had shifted. Not a grand miracle, but a realignment of spirit, the kind that transforms pilgrims. And as night gave way to day, his journey was only beginning. If this story made you think, subscribe for the next one. Morning light touched Elias softly, as if the sky itself approached him with careful steps. He rose slowly, still tender from the night's turmoil, yet something inside him felt steadier. His heart carried the memory of a divine nearness he could not explain. I watched him with quiet reverence, for such awakenings do not roar. They unfold like hidden dawns inside the soul. He walked as one newly aware of the sacred, though the weight of life still clung to him. His thoughts circled the same question. Why had God allowed him to sink so low? Yet I knew the truth from my own wanderings. Sometimes the soul must reach its last breath to learn its truest prayer. The night had undone him, so heaven could rebuild him. Elias stepped into a small park, empty and hushed, where crooked branches reached upward like ancient fingers pointing toward the unseen. He paused beneath them, sensing that prayer was no longer something he produced, but something he responded to. The air around him felt different, thin, delicate, alive with a presence waiting to teach him more. He sat on a worn wooden bench, letting the quiet settle inside him. His hands traced the cracked lines of the wood as if searching for meaning in its scars. The stillness did not intimidate him as before. It welcomed him. I remembered the silence of my prison cell, how it had become a sanctuary when my heart finally surrendered. Elias entered that same holy quiet. A thought surfaced within him, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Pray without ceasing is not a demand. It is an invitation, not to speak endlessly, but to remain turned toward God. The idea settled into him like warm oil, spreading through the fractures of his heart. He breathed deeply, and even that breath felt like communion. Birdsong broke the silence, weaving the morning into praise. Elias listened, almost stunned by the beauty of such simple worship. It struck him that creation prayed without ceasing by simply being what it was made to be, and perhaps he could too. The thought humbled him but also freed him. Not performance, just alignment. He began to speak to God, not with effort, but with honesty. His words came unevenly, but they came. He confessed his fear, his shame, his exhaustion. He admitted that he felt far from God even when trying to stand near him. Yet as he spoke, something unexpected happened. He felt no accusation, only welcome. Heaven listened to broken syllables as if they were precious. I felt a stir within myself, a remembrance of the valleys I once walked. How many times had I mistaken God's gentleness for absence? Elias was learning what I had learned, that continual prayer is simply refusing to turn away, even when bruised, even when wordless, even when nothing inside feels holy. Elias rose again, quieter, lighter. He moved through the park with unhurried steps, each one steady, deliberate, almost worshipful. The sky brightened above him, and he sensed a companionship he had never known. Prayer was no longer confined to set moments. It breathed with him. It followed him. It wrapped itself around his steps like an invisible cloak. At a small stream, the morning light danced on the water, catching his attention. He knelt, cupped the cool surface with his hands, and felt life run across his palms. The touch awakened something deep within him. Every element of creation seemed to whisper the same truth. God is near. God is always near. It was he who had been far. His lips parted, not in ritual, but in gratitude. He felt humbled by how easily God met him once he stopped striving. I felt the echo of that humility inside my own spirit. The miracle was not in the water or the sunrise. It was in the heart of a man who finally stopped resisting the grace he feared he did not deserve. When Elias left the park, the city was stirring around him. People hurried, engines hummed, voices rose. Yet he walked untouched by the rush. His heart carried a stillness that resisted the world's noise. He realized he could pray even here, amid the clamor, not with words, but with a posture that refused to lose sight of God. He turned each thought toward heaven, not forcefully but naturally. Even his worries became prayers in their earliest form. His insecurities became invitations. His longing became a steady reaching upward, and heaven met each motion without hesitation. I watched with awe, for this is the life prayer was always meant to shape. As he approached his home, he sensed that continual prayer was not a spiritual marathon, but a series of small returns, falling and rising, wandering and returning. Fear and surrender. It was the rhythm of a child learning to walk holding the Father's hand, and Elias felt that hand now, firm, patient, unwavering. He paused at his door, letting the morning settle around him like a benediction. He looked toward the brightening sky, and though he spoke no words, his heart lifted a silent offering. God received it as clearly as if it had been shouted from a mountaintop. Prayer had become his breath, his anchor, his quiet devotion. I felt the holy weight of that moment, having once walked my own harsh roads to reach such understanding. Prayer without ceasing is not the labor of the strong, but the lifeline of the weak. Elias had not mastered prayer. Prayer had mastered him, and that mastery was gentle, like a shepherd lifting a wounded lamb. He opened the door with a steadiness that came not from certainty, but from trust. His trials had not vanished, yet they no longer ruled him. He was learning to live in conversation with the one who saw him at his worst and drew near anyway. That is the mystery of continual prayer, not many words, but a constant turning. As he stepped inside, I sensed the transformation was permanent. Not a fleeting moment of inspiration, but a shift in the foundation of his soul. He would stumble again, yes, but he would not wander alone. The dawn had carved the truth into him. God meets those who meet him with their weakness, not their strength. And so I leave his side, though not his story. For I know the path he now walks, having walked it myself through dungeons and valleys of shadow. Continual prayer had become his new way of living, a life bending toward God at every breath, a pilgrim learning the true rhythm of grace. If this story made you smile, leave a like. It helps us reach more people. The sun had fully risen when I stepped back from Elias's path, yet his spirit remained open before me like a freshly written page. He walked with a renewed calm, not because his wounds had disappeared, but because he had learned to let them speak to God. I saw clearly that heaven seeks not perfect men, but surrendered ones. The ancient command, pray without ceasing, no longer felt like a burden to him but a doorway. I watched the same realization that transformed me long ago take root in him. Prayer is not measured by words but by direction. A heart turned Godward becomes a living sanctuary, even when trembling. His steps carried the quiet courage of someone who understood that every moment could be holy. He no longer feared his weakness, for it became the very place where God met him. Continual prayer had ceased to be a discipline and had become a way of breathing, slow, honest, and deeply human. As he moved forward, I sensed his journey would no longer be shaped by anxiety, but by intimacy. The ordinary rhythms of life, silence, struggle, hope, would now form his prayers. He discovered the gentle truth that God walks with those who simply refuse to turn away, even in their lowest moments. And so I close my account, as one who has also walked through shadows and found God waiting there. Elias learned that continual prayer is not perfection, but presence, not performance but surrender. May every pilgrim who hears his story discover that a heart bent toward heaven is never truly alone. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs hope.